Hi, my name is Rukis, and in this episode we're looking at 10 things that every group should be doing to prepare for Seed Pioneers. So let's start with what we know so far. We know that Seed Pioneers is launching somewhere in 2020, and we're all very excited watching for information on when it will actually be launching. It's like that girl or guy that you have an eye on, you are watching them, you're checking every move, but there's no date yet. We know that it's a closed alpha and that Klang will be inviting group leaders to put together groups to participate in the alpha. We know that the Discord community will be the best place to find or secure a seat for yourself in the alpha on one of the kernels going to Avesta. We know that a typical group will be around 50 strong, and that the group leaders will have to put those groups together, probably on the Discord, finding new players there to flesh out their group of 50 to make sure they get an opportunity to participate in the alpha. We know that each group will be playing on their own instance of the game, so it's not going to be one world with 20 or 30 groups of 50 trying to compete against each other. It will be one group per world or per installation, and it's up to that group to achieve the mission objectives. We know that the focus is not player to player or combat or defense or economy or trade, but it is achieving the mission objectives and the basics of surviving as a group, which means farming, generation of food, some building, gathering of resources, and it will be around getting the group to function as well as possible and achieving the mission objectives, which are to repair and maintain the terraformer on the island of Ilo. And we know that there's some information being built outside of the game on various sites, links and profiles, and that's starting to give us a bit of a backstory of where the Pioneers program will be coming from, why it's starting, what's the motivation for the launch of the Seed Pioneers, and what are some of the companies or organizations that are developing some of the technologies that the Pioneers will be using on ILO during the game. Okay, so 10 things that every group should be doing to prepare for Seed Pioneers. First is to take a look at Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. If you're not familiar with it, Mundi shared it on the Discord a while back, and it's one of the main mental models that they are using to determine certain mechanics in the game, help with decision making on how the development should be going, what elements should be available to seedlings and to players. And Maslow is a simplified way of looking at the needs and the motivations of individuals and groups. It looks at things like security needs, psychological needs, belonging, self-actualization, safety, security, all of that fits into it. So it's a very good reference point to understand where seedlings, what are some of the motivations they'll have, what are some of the needs they will have, and what we as players will have to make sure they get in order to be happy and healthy seedlings in the game. Second is to establish a presence on Discord. Discord is turning out to be the main place for discussions around the game. The AMAs are being held there. There's lots of information being shared and discussed among the prospective players, and some groups have created their own Discord servers to sort of start establishing their group as well, and group discussions and creating basic organizational plans and opening communication lines, how decisions will be made, what's going to be done on in the game in the Alpha Pioneers program. So number 3 is that Discord is also a good place to start building the backstory of your group. There's some of the groups that have been playing games for many years, and who are moving into the seed universe wanting to play the game. So those groups might have a long backstory, or you are starting a new group and you want to build some of the backstory to it. What are some of the principles, some of the law that goes with your group, its purpose, its ideals, what it's trying to achieve. And so Discord is a good place to start doing that if you have your own server, for example. And what's interesting is on the group recruitment page in the seed server, there's quite a bit of articles and old reference materials being shared by some of the group leaders that are building, that backstory for the group, because at some point it's going to be open to the public and there's going to be thousands of players wanting maybe to join a group or an organization, and you want them to join your group with a good idea of what the group is trying to achieve, what it's done in the past, where does the leadership come from, what's some of the knowledge and experience they have, which will become interesting and relevant in playing the game and deciding where you're going to hitch your wagon, to which group you're going to be part of, because you don't want to be part of a group that is not set up very well and doesn't last very long in the game, and then you're out of the game, you're out of the alpha, you're out of the main game eventually. So you want to make sure that the group has a good history and a good foundation that it's based on before you decide to join that group. So number 4 that groups need to be doing is start basic discussion around how decisions will be made. Now, some of the groups have already indicated that they're very open, very democratic, everybody's got a say, and there are other groups saying no, it's about the leadership and their success, and they are looking for subservient players who will do what they're told, who focused on the success of the leaders, and they just want the ants making up the colony, doing the building, doing the day-to-day duties, making sure enough resources are being gathered, and then it's up to the leaders to enjoy, I think, a lot more from the gameplay than some of the other players. So depending on what you want to achieve, you might be willing to be part of a group like that, just do your little bit, be one of the ants in the colony, or maybe you want to be one of the leaders but you want it to be a democratic election process, but depending on what you want out of the game and what you want to get and how you want to set up your group, it's something that you want to start thinking about, that decision making process and guidelines, and that will start putting together also the leadership structure. Will you have supervisors? Will you have subgroup leaders? Will you have security? Will you have a technology division or a research division? How will farming and food production be handled? Will that be a group on its own? So there's quite a number of things that have to be decided, preferably beforehand, because once the firing gun goes off and the alpha program is live, you might not have a lot of time to figure out those decisions. And that brings me to number 5, which is that if your seedlings die in the alpha program, you won't necessarily be able to replace them. You won't necessarily be able to respawn and just start over again. You might be out of the game completely. So you want to be very sure of how things are being set up and how the group will be functioning to make sure that you survive in the game, that you stay in the game as long as possible. The next thing that groups will need to be doing is to start following the trails of breadcrumbs that are appearing around the game. And it's in the form of certain profiles, certain websites, certain links that you can follow which lead you to a next bit of information that, if you keep following the trail, gives you access to some information that not everybody has. But you will have to put in some effort as a group or as an individual to follow the trail, to solve the riddles, to get that information. And we're not 100% sure yet how that will be relevant to the Pioneers program or the main game, but it's part of the backstory. It's part of the reason why certain technologies are being created, why certain decisions are being made, and that will have an influence on whether you might have access to the information that gets you onto the alpha program. We don't know yet. We don't know if Klang is going to open that up to everybody and anybody can apply, or whether you will need to have connected to a certain person or a certain individual or a certain organization and maybe followed a certain process of training or access to information proving that you have the skill to be part of the Pioneers program. So as a group, you might want to start investigating that information and building up those connections to make sure that you have the best chance of success of entering your group into the alpha program. And if you haven't done that yet, if you don't know where to start by visiting Keto Foods, their website. It's a good place to find the starting point of some of the riddles, and if you follow it, it'll lead you to more information. So start at ketofoods.org if you haven't visited it yet. The next thing is to consider time zones. Some of the groups are set up only to allow players from a specific time zone. Now you've got to remember, in SEED it's a persistent simulation, so it runs 24/7 whether you are logged in or not. So if your group only comes from a specific time zone, you might have certain parts of the day, certain parts of your seedlings day, that nobody's there to look after your seedlings, nobody's there to keep an eye on them to make sure they're safe and happy. If there isn't somebody 24/7 looking after your group of seedlings, it could be that they are unprotected. And there are certain dangers in the Pioneers program that could disrupt your entire group or your schedules of your seedlings. It could even kill some of your seedlings. And as I mentioned before, we're not sure whether you'll be able to resurrect your seedlings that have died. And you might not be able to respawn, so it might mean that you are out of the Pioneers program completely. So that's why it's so important that 24/7 there's at least somebody in your group keeping an eye on things, making sure that everything is going well, because you don't want to log in and find that everything's fallen apart and your base is being demolished or there's been an accident. And even if it's only a group per installation, there's still dangers on Avesta and on the island. And of course it could just be the developers seeing that you are offline and you're not taking care of your seedlings, and they just decide to throw a spanner into the machine just to disrupt everything, to see also how the game works, but also to see how you respond and how the different groups handle different problems in the game and different crises. So the next tip is to participate in the AMAs. So on Discord there's an AMA channel where every now and again there's an AMA being run by the developers, and in between those there's not a lot of answers being provided for some of the questions being posted. So it's very important to use those AMAs as an opportunity to gather information, to ask the questions that you have as a group. And it's been, I think, the main place of getting information, apart from the Pioneers and the SEED website, to get information about how things will work in the game, what sort of planning, what's the development. There's still a lot of questions unanswered, but the AMAs are your best place of finding answers to some of the questions you have before the Pioneers program starts. So use them for that purpose. We don't know how many AMAs are left before Pioneers will launch. Might only be a few, so it's important to use them to ask your questions and see what information we can get out of the developers that guide us in terms of how to do the setup for the Pioneers program. So number 9 is not to think of SEED as being like any other game. We are all as a community hoping that this game will be different, and it will bring other elements of gameplay that we haven't found in other games before, and that will give us the type of gameplay that we are looking for in this new game. So we have to be open to the idea that how we are thinking the game will work and how it will eventually end up will change. So as a group, you will need to understand how you will handle those changes. And I'm sounding like a consultant here talking about change management and all of that, but you'll have to have an idea of how those changes will be managed, because they could be coming quickly throughout the gameplay. And again, a new introduction of something into the gameplay while we are playing will need us to be online so that we are aware that something is changing, and also so that we can react in time without suffering the consequences for our group. You don't want there to be a change in the game, and when you log in again, half your seedlings are gone because you didn't have somebody watching and you didn't have a way of managing those changes. So one way, for example, would be to, as you pick up something new in the game, that to be posted on Discord to your group, and the group be able to discuss, come up with a plan quickly, put certain actions into motions to make sure that your group is protected, your seedlings are protected, and things are running as they should be. And then number 10 is to remember that this is Seed Pioneers. This is not the full game. So your group needs to function with that in mind. You don't want to give away everything that you would be doing in the end game, in the main game, while we are doing Seed Pioneers. So keep in mind that after the Pioneers program, it could be that your entire group disbands and forms their own groups for the main game. And then you need to have protected the information or the way that your group is set up, or some of the experience and wisdom that you have built up in your group. You need to have protected that in some way so that other players cannot use that against you in the main game. So keep in mind, this is the alpha, it's a closed program, and that the group you put together here might not be the group that you end up playing with in the main game. So just keep that in mind. And of course, there's a bonus tip number 11, watch my videos. That's an easy one to remember. Subscribe if you are willing. There's a lot more content coming down the line, lots of videos. So thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting me up to now. Those of you on Patreon also, I really appreciate it. And if you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. Come and chat with us on Discord if you haven't visited there. Support me on Patreon if you are willing. And I'll see you again next time. Cheers.